Good morning, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to another edition of Breaking News. Today is Wednesday, the 21st day of May, 2025. And as always, we have some very important stories in the news to bring to you. First, there's new intelligence that suggests that Israel's preparing a possible strike on Iranian nuclear facilities. This is from U.S. officials. They told CNN we're going to report that story to you. And then, in a similar story, Iran has no plan B if the nuclear talks of the U.S. fail. They have no backup plan, according to YNET. Also, contrary to all the fake news stories that have been coming out of recently, the U.S. is not changing its dealings towards Israel. This is per the testimony of Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, yesterday in Washington, made it very clear nothing is changing with respect to the U.S. and Israel. And finally, a very worrisome event that took place in the UK. Boris Johnson comments on that former prime minister, that the new prime minister, Starmer, he said his Britain under him is turning into a police state. This is from the UK Daily Mail, and we'll get to that. All right, on your Bible questions answered today, we have the third in a series of 5 videos dealing with Ezekiel 38:39. That scenario. Today we answer the question, is the prediction of a last days invasion of Israel to be understood literally? All right, we have a housekeeping matter we have to deal with for a couple minutes here, and it's directed at those who are financially supporting our ministry. You should have received a letter recently from Go Ministries about some updated information about this group. And this was not a scam. This is actually legitimate. Go Ministries is the ministry we use to people make contributions to us to support us, and they're changing their names to Go Ministries Outreach, different IRS category they're in, and basically it's to make simplify things. They had to fill out all these forms and do all this jumping through all these hoops, and it's going to be easier for them. So nothing has really changed, except they do have now a different PO box and a different name for people to send checks to. And for those who have a recurring account, they have to change. You have to change the name there to Go Ministries Outreach. And we deal with this. We have a little at the bottom of the page here of the summary today. We explain all that's going on. So we needed to tell you that in case you were wondering. It starts tomorrow with the new name and the new situation there. So we appreciate so much those of you that give, those of you who have supported us. If you've been with us for the last 2.5 years, not two, well, actually a little over, it's just 2 years now, doing these programs, you notice we never talk about money. We never talk about giving. The only reason I'm doing this today is because there's a different place that people will give to a different same organization, but a little bit different. With, like I said, with the PO box and the way you give, but basically everything remains the same. And just as a quick aside, it's an amazing story what happened. And I just want to testify to this before we get going. It's very humbling for me to realize this. It was 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago. I was going along really well. I was speaking every day at literally every day, 5 TV programs a week, a national radio program, speaking at churches every week, retreats for something like 24 straight weeks. I'd speak at a different church. I was very busy doing that. Then everything changed November 14th, 2021, when I had a major heart attack and I couldn't do anything. And next time I spoke at a church was almost 10 months later. I've only spoken at 4 churches in the last 3.5 years. The wonderful thing that happened, though, and this is God knowing what was going to happen to me in the future before I knew. I had a friend who would invite me out with others for a dinner, a real nice dinner, and wanted me to answer Bible questions. And I like doing it. He was a really good man. And in doing so, he would give me some money. I said, "Look, I don't want any money for this. No, no, I want to support your ministry." But then he said, can you hook up with this Go Ministries? It's a nonprofit organization that supports missionaries that are doing things, so I can get a write-off." And I said, "Okay, sure." And I never mentioned this organization to anybody. I didn't need the money. I was doing fine. Wasn't becoming wealthy, but I was doing fine with all the speaking, book selling, and that. But to make a short story long, what happened was when I had the heart attack, there was now something set in place for people to give, something that I'd never mentioned before. And fortunately, the word got out that I needed help, and you people were above and beyond answering the call of duty, let me tell you, and helping me out. And I appreciate that. And I can't thank you enough. And for those who continue to help us out, I cannot thank you enough. It's very humbling to realize that God had it all planned, because I have a hard time accepting things from other people. Many of you are probably the same way. And I was working for a living, and it was very nice doing that, and I was doing fine, but God knew I wouldn't have to be doing these programs now from here. And that's what we've been doing the last just 2 years. And God has blessed it above and beyond anything we can imagine. In fact, in about 3 weeks, we'll hit the 10 million mark of views in the last 2 years of people been watching these different videos from either our website, our YouTube page, or our app. And again, I want to thank you very much for that. So anyway, I needed to do that aside. Thank you for putting up with me with this. At the bottom of the page today, again, is the information, the summary that we have on these stories of what the changes are. And I'll just stop talking about that and get to the headlines. Okay, but again, thank you so very much. All right, headline number one, new intelligence suggests Israel is preparing possible strike on Iranian nuclear facilities, U.S. officials say. This is per CNN. The U.S. has obtained new intelligence suggesting that Israel is making preparations to strike Iranian nuclear facilities, even as the Trump administration has been pursuing a diplomatic deal with Tehran. Multiple U.S. officials familiar with the latest intelligence told CNN. Such a strike would be a brazen break with President Donald Trump, U.S. officials said, and it also could risk tipping off a broader regional conflict in the Middle East, something that the U.S. has sought to avoid since the war in Gaza inflamed tensions beginning in 2023. All right, officials caution it's not clear that Israeli leaders have made a final decision, and that, in fact, there is deep disagreement within the U.S. government about the likelihood that whether Israel will or will not ultimately act, individually, separately against Iran. Whether and how Israel strikes will likely depend on what it thinks of the U.S. negotiation with Tehran over its nuclear program. But the chance of an Israeli strike at an Iranian nuclear facility has gone up significantly in recent months, and one person familiar with the U.S. intelligence on the issue and the prospect of a Trump negotiated U.S.-Iran deal that doesn't remove all of Iran's uranium makes the chances of a strike more likely. Now, we've got these indicators here. And again, we don't know what's going to happen. It may or may not be, they may or may not strike. I've been told they're going to strike Iran by a cyber attack coming soon against Iran. That's going to happen. But whether they bomb the various facilities there remains to be seen. They may do it, they may not. Again, we just don't know. It's one of these things like we talked about yesterday. So many things can take place in the Middle East, but Iran, as the U.S. says, cannot have nuclear weapons, cannot keep enriching uranium to this weapons grade. So something must occur. And as we saw yesterday, the Ayatollah said it looks like nothing's going to come out of the deal. There's not going to be really any agreement. And so this can't drag on forever. So something has to give one way or another. And Israel has been practicing. We've got the article talks about this of, they're of doing something like this, going through the motions of what they would have to do if they did a strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. And one of the interesting things that we have talked about here, if they do this, they can do it with very little human damage. You can strike directly on the various sites there. They're not going to do a bomb where they hit the main cities or hit the main population centers. They're very pinpoint strikes, which they would do, which would set back Iran's nuclear program for a very long period of time, which needs to be done. So will it be done? Well, just like we say here every day, we don't know. We just have to wait and see. But there has been some movement towards this recently. And so, as always, stay tuned. All right, now, the problem, of course, for Iran is our second headline. Iran has no plan B if nuclear talks with the U.S. fail. This is from YNET News. Differences over enrichment put nuclear talks in balance. No deal would expose Iran to sanctions, military threat, unrest. Iran would strengthen ties with China and Russia, officials say, but warn that such a fallback is flawed. In other words, Iran doesn't have a whole lot of options here. They'd be exposed to sanctions, to military threat without a deal. There'd be unrest there in the country. What they have been doing, as we have been mentioning, they're trying to strengthen its ties with Russia in particular. And we know they're going to strengthen the ties with Russia because eventually Russia is going to lead an invasion of Israel in the last days per Ezekiel 38:39, and Iran's going to be one of the surrogates that go on. China is not a player in last days Bible prophecy. They've gone to China. And the problem is, of course, that each country wants to extract something from Iran, as the article says. It says, in a rare glimpse of internal dissent, 3 Iranian officials told Reuters this week that Iran's leadership has no viable contingency plan if nuclear negotiations with the United States collapse. A stark contrast to the image of strategic resilience often projected by Tehran. The remarks published late Tuesday coincided with this separate CNN report citing a fresh U.S. intelligence that we just mentioned that they're possible was skeptical of the nuclear talks and working on a potential strike. Israeli officials fear any future agreement would fall short of neutralizing Iran's nuclear threat. Now, Iranian authorities obviously dismissed both reports. This is just psychological warfare. And in a statement carried by their semi-official Tasnim news agency, officials warned of increased propaganda and psychological operations from Western powers aimed at undermining Iran's negotiating team. Now, according to the Reuters report, if talks with Washington fail, a scenario Iran Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khomeini raised just yesterday, Tehran plans to lean more heavily on alliances with Russia and China. The plan B is to continue the strategy before the start of talks. Iran will avoid escalating tensions. It is ready to defend itself, said a senior Iranian official, and it could involve deepening ties with Beijing and Moscow. And here's the however. However, the same sources warn that a fallback is flawed. China is preoccupied with its trade war in the U.S., and Russia remains bogged down in its war with Ukraine. Also, experts cited by Russia agree that the support is not unlimited. Beijing, for instance, has demanded steep discounts on Iranian oil and may press for even lower prices if Iran needs their help. And Russia will also extract more things from Iran. So this is consistent with what we've been reporting here. Now, again, the stalling of Iran cannot go on forever. Something must be done. As to what and when, well, we continue to wait and see. But Iran really has no backup plan. So they're in a very difficult situation. That's why they've been crying out for some type of deal to unfreeze much of the money that they have that have been held, and to allow them to continue to export terrorism, to support groups like Hamas, the Houthis, and Hezbollah. But they can't do that now because they're hurting financially, and with the recent accidents that have been happening in their country, destroying a lot of their, for example, they're on the coast with the $5 billion, something like that, worth of their assets there, where they have the containers where that all blew up recently. Well, that accident has really put them in a very difficult position of sending out more terrorist material and receiving more terrorist material from China. So it's interesting that's all working out. So again, something's going to be done. We just don't know when and how. But Iran's in a very hard place. So that's why they need an agreement. Now, this next headline is extremely important. It's something we've been harping on recently. Marco Rubio, this is from the Jewish News Syndicate, says the U.S. is urging but not pressuring Israel on Gaza. The Secretary of State outlined the Trump administration's approach to Gaza and Iran in the Senate testimonies from the Jewish News Syndicate. He told lawmakers yesterday that the Trump administration was encouraging but not threatening Israel to resume humanitarian aid shipments to Gaza. Speaking before a Senate Appropriations Committee, Rubio said that while the United States has not followed European countries in issuing sanctions or public warnings over aid shortfalls, the administration has conveyed its expectations. We're not prepared to respond the same way these countries have, as we did this story, two stories yesterday and the day before. He said the United States has engaged with Israel in the last few days about the need to resume humanitarian aid. We anticipate that those flows will increase over the next few days and weeks. It's important that this be achieved. In other words, they're not changing their dealings with Israel. We have had, in the last few weeks, so much fake news on that. And we know that Britain, Canada, two of the countries that have basically, and France is a third country, that are threatened to sanction Israel, to declare a Palestinian state, and just forget what Israel wants, what they need, and basically support Hamas, what they're doing. And the U.S. says, no, this is not what we're doing here at all. So please, let's understand this, because you've probably been hearing from various quarters all these fake news stories. It's incredible how many of them I see every day from these leftist sources from both the U.S. and Israel. So anyway, Marco Rubio set the record straight. They're not changing anything. They're supporting Israel. We continue to do it. Thank God for that. And what will happen next with respect, again, like we said yesterday, to the Hamas deal with Israel, with the deal with the United States and Tehran with respect to their nuclear facilities, that's all up in the air. But it seems that something must happen militarily in each case, because Hamas is not budging, Iran is not budging, and these cannot go on forever. So as always, we'll keep you posted. Now, finally, this is a story. I think we briefly alluded to this last year, but it's one that's hit the headlines today in the UK, and it's very disturbing. Boris Johnson, former prime minister, warns that Starmer, that's the new prime minister of the UK, Britain, is turning it into a police state, basically, UK into a police state. This is in the UK Daily Mail. And this is a result of a story of a mother who tweeted about the Southport murders. She fails in her bid to have lengthy jail terms slashed. And we'll explain what went on. Okay, first of all, Boris Johnson said Britain has become a police state, he warned last night. He spoke as the sentencing row erupted after a mother locked up for a tweet after the Southport murders failed in a bid to reduce her lengthy jail term. Lucy Connolly is her name. She posted a vile message about migrants, but supporters pointed out that criminals found guilty of far more serious offenses have been handed substantially shorter sentences. And former Prime Minister Mr. Johnson warned that the country is losing its reputation for free speech as a growing number of online rants draw the attention of police. Well, here's what happened. Connolly, she's 42 years of age. She asked the Court of Appeals to free her early from a 31-month sentence for inciting racial hatred imposed after she posted a tweet urging people to set fire to the hotels on the day of the triple murder last summer. If you remember, there was swirling misinformation going on at that time everywhere online, including a claim that the knifeman, remember these three young girls who were going to some type of Taylor Swift event, three young girls that were murdered, and the immediate story that went out was fake news, that the knifeman was a person who was a small boat migrant who had just come over to the UK on a boat. He was a migrant, and a false claim that led to weeks of race riots. It turned out it was someone who had been radicalized by Islam, but it wasn't who'd been there. He'd been born in the country actually, but not someone who'd been just been brought over. So the woman, upset, posted this tweet urging people to set fire to the hotels where these new migrants were at. And so, again, it was a false claim, but this did not, because it wasn't these people, this group of migrants who did it, but the police saw it, they got to her, and they sentenced her to 31 months in jail for saying that. Her heartbreaking husband, he's actually a counselor from the Tories, and he insists that his wife was a good person, not a far-right thug. As judges yesterday dismissed her appeal against her jail term, he condemned the system as two-tiered justice and said it was not the British way. Okay, here's the bottom line. Well, she never should have made this tweet in the first place, calling for violence, as our story noted. Her sentence is extremely harsh. What we see in the UK, and here's the takeaway from this, is now true in other countries that governments are using their authority to clamp down on speech that they don't like. And again, this is keeping with the picture of the last days where the operative word will be control, control, control by the governments of the world when the final Antichrist rules. For a thorough understanding of what this character, who this character is and what he's going to do, please see our book called The Final Antichrist, The Coming Caesar. It's a free download from our website, Educating Our World, under the heading of Bible prophecy, and explains how more and more we're going to see this, a clampdown on speech, which these countries decide what's bad speech, what's evil speech, what's a speech that shouldn't be given. It's their call, and they just again make these things up. So anyway, it's sad what we see in Britain. Again, we've seen the same thing in the European Union, as we've talked about too, and we'll just see more and more of this as time goes by. So the takeaway from this is the powers that be are exercising their control over the citizenry. And as they get more and more, they're exercising about what we say. And that's why you need to be careful what you say. And of course, violence is never called for. We never should do that. And it was wrong that she did that. But again, a 31-month sentence for that. You have to remember, and if you were back at that time, we would read these stories. It was a complete outrage is not even a strong enough word to explain what happened. There, three young girls were murdered by some knifeman. And the immediate story was that here's someone just brought over in a boat, a migrant that we've been worrying about, wondering about. So people made some really bad statements at that time. And that's why this woman is in jail. All right. Again, I'm Don Stewart. Thank you so much for watching this edition of Breaking News. We'll have, again, a story today, number 3 in our Your Bible Questions Answered about the Ezekiel 38-39 scenario. And like we said, at the bottom of this summary, we'll have an explanation for those of you who do support us of how the changes that are now made with respect to Go Ministry. Again, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, as always, may the Lord richly, richly bless.